Welcome to part 3 of our module on friendship and love, where you're going to be learning about romantic love. What will you be learning about romantic love? Well, you're going to be learning about some of the gender differences regarding love and some of the research findings on the experience of love in gay and straight couples. You'll also learn about Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and you'll learn about the theory of adult attachment styles. You'll learn about the course of romantic love over time, including what couples go through as they dissolve a relationship. And then you're going to be learning about why relationships fail and what couples can do to help relationships to last.
I think it's very important for us to note at this point that most studies of romantic love suffer from what we would call heterosexism, or the assumption that all individuals and relationships are heterosexual. And so, they're also with heterosexism, in addition, if for those of you who've heard this term before, not only does it relate to the assumption that all individuals and relationships are heterosexual, but it also relates to prejudice and discrimination against people who are LGBT based on the assumption that heterosexuality is the only normal sexual orientation and therefore preferable, and also relates to the systemic display of homophobia in societal institutions and laws and policies by excluding the needs and concerns and the life experiences of people who are LGBT. So I think some examples of heterosexism could include assuming that everyone you meet is heterosexual, or assuming that everyone has or is interested in having an opposite sex partner, or assuming that all mothers and fathers are heterosexual, or assuming that all unmarried people are single, while in reality they may have a same-sex partner. Assuming that all children in families live with a male-female couple in parental roles, or using language that presumes heterosexuality in others like husband or wife instead of gender-neutral language like partner. So those are just some examples of heterosexism and things we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about relationships. So because of heterosexism, less is known about homosexual relationships. And what I do want to point out, though, is that homosexual romance and relationships seem to be basically the same as those as heterosexuals. But then we also want to keep in mind that there are many different types of relationships and we don't know much about the different types of relationships that are related to sexuality because of the limited research, and again, because of this underlying heterosexism. So before you look at this slide, which I know is hard to do, I want to ask you, who is really more romantic? Do you think it's men or do you think it's women? Could it be that men are really the romantics? This maybe seems hard to believe. We think about magazine stands that are filled with bridal magazines and shelves of romantic movies and novels marketed to women, or I think of TLC's Say Yes to the Dress, or there's another show on the Learning Channel where women compare their weddings. And we think about romantic films as being targeted to women, but actually the research suggests that the male attitude toward love might actually be more romantic than the attitude that women have. And so let's look at a term. The term is romanticism, and this is an outlook on relationships where love should be the most important criterion in choosing a mate. So people with a highly romantic view of love, they believe that their love will be perfect and that each of us has one true love. So now that we've I've described for you what is meant by romance, what do you think? Would you agree with that based on your own experience? Now, of course, our own experiences are anecdotal, not representative of the general population, but still interesting to reflect on. Do you think men are going to be more romantic than women? Well, again, it turns out that men actually do tend to be higher in romanticism than women. So how do you measure romanticism? So there's a scale that's known as the Romantic Belief Scale. And this is a questionnaire that asks people to rate different statements and how they, the degree to which they agree with these statements. And the statements would include things like, there's only one true love for me, or if I love someone, I know I can make the relationship work despite any obstacles, and the person I love will make a perfect romantic partner. He or she will be completely accepting, loving, and understanding. And so based on this scale, the researchers have found that on average, men tend to outscore women. So, when you think about your own experiences, they may align with this or they may not align with this. I think it's plausible that the messages that we receive in society about women and romanticism and men and romanticism certainly have shaped how we see men and women. But the research really says something different than what we may have learned based on our individual experiences through the media and through the grocery store or wherever we go and see these magazines or advertisements or films and novels. I wanted to share something else that's very interesting, and this is the notion of love at first sight. And the research has found that men report being more likely to experience love at first sight. And there was a survey that was done on over 100,000 adults, and they found that almost half of men, about 48%, claim to have fallen in love at first sight, while only 28% of women had made such a claim. And men, more than women, tended to place a greater emphasis on feeling passion in their relationships. And men have also been found more likely to say, I love you in a relationship first than women. And they report greater happiness than women do after hearing those words for the first time. So these are some perhaps counterintuitive gender differences. Maybe we can think about these differences in terms of our biological predispositions. If we go back to thinking about human history and mate selection, women are more selective, and they've tended to be more selective throughout history. So perhaps they would be more inclined to think that love should develop slowly. Perhaps they think that they should be more cautious before jumping into a relationship. And so men perhaps because they can have many children, they don't have to be as selective. They can be freer with those feelings and then are freer with those feelings. So what are the characteristics of love relationships? Well, there's a very well-known theorist named Robert Sternberg, and he came up with what's called the triangular theory of love. And this theory states that loving relationships are comprised of some combination of three components. So we have intimacy, which is warmth, closeness, and sharing. We have passion, which includes intense feelings, both positive and negative, including sexual desire. And then we have commitment, and this is the intent and decision to maintain a relationship in spite of the difficulties and costs that may arise. Sternberg suggests that there are 8 types of relationships that can result from the presence or absence of each of these 3 components. He also suggests that the ultimate type of love is what is called consummate love, and this is where all 3 of these components are present. So let's take a look at a visual of this triangular theory of love. So here we see consummate love in the center, which is comprised of intimacy, passion, and commitment. And we have liking, which is intimacy alone. We have romantic love, which is intimacy plus passion. And we have infatuation, which is passion alone. Fatuous love, which is passion and commitment. So there's no intimacy, no sharing. And then we have empty love, so there's commitment. This may be someone who's in a long committed relationship, but there's no passion and there's no sharing or intimacy. And then we have companionate love. And this is more like a close friendship, but you're in a committed relationship. And this is where you have intimacy and commitment, but you don't have the passion. And so if you think about couples who may go to couples counseling, it would be important to be able to identify which of these important variables isn't present, because we know that the ideal form of love in a relationship involves all three. And so if there's, if someone's in a relationship that's companionate love, one person may feel like there's something missing, or both partners may, and it may be that that's what the couples therapist is going to spend some time working with them on. So this is a very helpful theory in couples counseling, but it's also a helpful theory for each of us when we think about our own relationships and what we might want to strive for, or also when we think about our own relationships and where we may be lacking, and where there may be an opportunity for growth or for change. So let's explore how our early childhood experiences and dynamics with a significant caregiver uh, affect our later relationships. And more specifically, let's take a look at attachment. So many of you in Introduction to Psychology or in Lifespan Psychology, you recall learning about Harry Harlow and his wife Marguerite, who studied infant monkeys who were separated from their mother, and they were then given the choice between the wire cloth, the wire mother covered in cloth, and the wire mother who provided just food or nourishment, and that the monkeys tended to prefer the artificial mother who provided warmth and comfort. So you're familiar with that study probably. And so that was a very famous study on attachment. So attachment, what we're talking about with attachment is an intense reciprocal relationship that develops between an infant and a caregiver. And so Harry Harlow, Marguerite Harlow, very important theorists in the study and researchers in the study of attachment. Another person you may have heard of is someone named John Bowlby. And it's okay if you haven't heard of him, but you may have an Introduction to Psych or in Lifespan. And so Bowlby, he observed that separated infants would go to extraordinary lengths, that they would cry, they might cling to someone, to their caregiver, or frantically search. And they would do this to prevent separation from their parents, or to reestablish closeness to a missing parent. And so in noticing this, he became very interested in what he then called attachment behaviors. And so these attachment behaviors, he said, were crying and searching. And he thought that these were adaptive responses to separation from a primary attachment figure. So a primary attachment figure is someone who's providing support, protection, and care. And because human beings can't feed or protect themselves, they're dependent on the care and protection of adults. So Bowlby thought that over the course of human history, infants were able to maintain closeness, who were able to maintain closeness to an attachment figure via those attachment behaviors, that they'd be more likely to survive. And so then these traits will be passed on from one generation to the next. And so this became an important concept in attachment theory, and this idea that we are programmed, we are biologically programmed to seek out that attachment relationship and engage in these behaviors because it's going to promote our survival. And so really what this attachment system is asking is, when we are, as our bodies or our brains are asking when we're babies, is, we're asking, is this attachment figure nearby? Are they accessible? Are they attentive? And if a child perceives that the answer is yes, then they're going to feel loved, they're going to feel secure, confident, and they're going to explore their environment. They're going to play with others, and they're going to be sociable. But if the child perceives the answer to this question as no, then the child is going to feel some anxiety, and they might exhibit some attachment behaviors like, just visual searching, looking for that attachment figure. And then on the other end, at a higher behavioral end, there might be a lot of crying and a lot of distress. And these behaviors continue until that child's able to reestablish that desired level of proximity to the attachment figure, whether the proximity is physical or psychological. And then, or until the child wears down. And this happens if the child experiences prolonged separation or loss. And this Bowlby thought that young children who experience that would really experience then profound despair and depression. So that's Bowlby. Now let's take a look then, let's kind of expound on this and think about someone whose name is Mary Ainsworth. So Mary Ainsworth was another very significant figure in the study of attachment. And she systematically studied infant-parent separations. And what she did is she developed a technique that was called the strange situation. And this was a laboratory model for studying infant-parent attachment. And in this situation, what she did is she had infants and their parents who were brought into a laboratory, and then she systematically separated them from each other and then reunited them with one another. So in this situation, there was a series of specific steps. So she had the child and the parent in a room together, and then the parent left and a stranger came in the room, and then the stranger left and the parent returned. And so the way that the child responded when the parent returned, it turned out, was it was related to what was happening in terms of the child behaviors in the home. So in this situation, what Mary Ainsworth found was that children who, when their parents left the room and then their parents returned, some of them exhibited, they sought out the parent and they were easily comforted by the parent. And children who exhibited this pattern of behavior were called secure. And then there were other children who were more ill at ease, and upon separation they became very distressed, and when they were reunited with their parents, they had a difficult time being soothed, and they would exhibit some conflicting behaviors that really suggested that they wanted to be comforted, but they also wanted to punish the parent for leaving. And so these children were called anxious resistant, anxious children. And so then, not anxious in the term of having anxiety, but in their attachment style. And then the third pattern that Mary Ainsworth found was something called avoidant attachment. And in this group, the children didn't appear very distressed by the separation, and when they were reunited, they avoided seeking contact with their parent, and sometimes they would just turn their attention to play objects that were on the floor. So you saw these three, so she found these three attachment styles. And what was interesting is that we could then summarize is that there are three types of children who exist in terms of their attachment relationship. Those who are secure in their relationship with their parents, those who are anxious, resistant, and those who are anxious, avoidant. And she demonstrated that these individual differences actually correlated with infant-parent interactions in the home during the first year of life. So that, for example, children who appeared secure in the strange situation, they tended to have parents who were responsive to their needs. And children who appeared insecure, like anxious, resistant, or avoidant, they often had parents who were insensitive to their needs or inconsistent or rejecting in the care that they provided. And there's been many subsequent studies that have supported this research. Before we move on, I want to caution you, and I want to mention that if you have children or if you work in a child care setting and you've noticed that your child or another child responds to you or their parent in a certain way that you might see aligned with these different attachment styles, that does not at all provide you with an accurate conclusion of the relationship. There are multiple reasons why children respond the way they do when parents pick the child up from childcare. And so in order for you to really get a true picture, if you wanted to do it experimentally, you would need to do it in a laboratory setting. Now, there are certainly different scales that you can use to measure attachment styles, and those can be very useful as well. But just doing this in a really rather passively observational way is not going to give you reliable or accurate conclusions. So with all of that context behind, what I want to show now is that we could think of this human experience as that children have as affecting them as they grow into adulthood. And so attachment processes play out in adult relationships. And so the emotional bond that develops between adult romantic partners is to some degree a function of the same motivational system, that attachment behavioral system that gives rise to that emotional bond between infants and their caregivers. And that so there's a lot of similarities between these two different types of relationships. So for example, when we think about the parallel between adult and child relationships and adult intimate relationships, in both of these types of relationships, both feel safe when the other is nearby and responsive. Okay, of course, this is assuming that it's a healthy relationship. Both engage in close, intimate bodily contact. Both feel insecure when the other is inaccessible. Both, even sometimes you'll find that some similarities with baby talk. So there's this parallel here, okay? And so, but it's not only that parallel that results in us repeating, which is what happens, some of what we've experienced in our childhood. It's also because that's what we feel comfortable with. That's what we've learned, that an important relationship is defined by, or that's what it looks like. And so adult relationships then are affected by these early relationships. So we would see then, what you might see then is that adult relationships reflect then what that individual experienced during early childhood. So I want to read to you now 3 specific series of statements that are related to different attachment styles. And these are statements that one could read and select whether they identify with or don't identify with. And this then would parallel to the adult attachment style that they have. So the first one is, I'm somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous when anyone gets too close, and often others want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. Now, does that seem like a secure attachment style? Does it seem like what does it sound like to you? Does it sound like avoidant? Does it sound like anxious? Well, let me share with you another one so that you can contrast, and I think that will help you. So here's another. Let's see. I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I often worry that my partner doesn't love me or won't stay with me. I want to get very close to my partner, and that sometimes scares people away. So does that sound secure? No, it doesn't sound secure. So the first one that I read is related to an avoidant attachment style. Okay, they're uncomfortable being close, difficult to trust. Think about those early relationships, or that early relationship that adult had with that significant caregiver when they were a child. And now let's think about this one I just read, where the person is worrying. They are afraid of getting close, or they're afraid, of that they want to get close and that their partner doesn't want that, and that they're going to scare people away. This might be someone who needs a lot of reassurance, and you might be in a relationship with someone like this, or maybe you're this person and you need that reassurance. You call them, they don't answer their phone. You call them frequently, wanting to really have that sense that everything is okay. And this is an anxious attachment style. This secure attachment style response or statement sounds like this. I find it relatively easy to get close to others, and I'm comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting close to me. So it's interesting because the frequency of this distribution or the frequency of which people identify with these different statements is very similar to the different patterns that you see, or the frequency of patterns you see in early childhood. So that's very interesting in itself. So this is what's also interesting here, is that you can see a parallel, and you see the relationship between adult attachment relationships and what that looks like, and why one may think about that relationship in the same context, or in a similar way that one may think about when they're very little, that relationship with that other significant person in their life, that parent or that caregiver. What I would encourage you to do is, if you aren't very familiar with Harlow's study on attachment, I have a link here in this slide. And what you can do is you can close the slideshow, or I think you can actually click on it at this point. You could probably click on attachment in Harlow, and a video would come up for you where you can see his original studies. And where you see other items underlined, you can also click on those to get more information. So I want to point out here, though, that just because someone has an insecure attachment relationship with their parent when they're a child, and that would mean either anxious or ambivalent, that does not mean that inevitably they're going to have that same relationship style in adulthood. But what it does mean is that we are vulnerable to that. We can change that course, though, by having healthy relationships with people in our lives who help us to develop a sense of trust, and to realize that we can trust another person's, to be responsive and to be consistent, and that they will be there for us. So it's not that we are doomed. I should also mention that you could have the most caring, responsive, wonderful parents and be securely attached as an infant. And then you could later have a relationship with someone who really has a negative impact on your perception of relationships and the future attachment styles that or attachment style that you take on. And you can see here too, these are adult attachment styles that are, what I'm talking about here is based on two different factors: attachment anxiety, how much a person worries that a partner will be available when they're needed, and attachment avoidant, the degree to which a person distrusts another person's goodwill and their tendencies to maintain emotional and behavioral distance from a partner. And these yield these different attachment styles. Now, I alluded to 3 on the last slide. Brennan, Clark, and Shaver have 4 attachment styles. And so you can see here, we have, if we look at figure 9.9, we have a real nice example for you of a parent's caregiving style, then the infant attachment, and then the adult attachment style. So you see here are those 3 that I went over just a moment ago. So a parent who's warm and responsive, that promotes secure attachment. And then that can help to lead to a secure adult attachment style. A parent who's cold and rejecting, they're distant, not very responsive, the child doesn't feel like they're much of a priority, this can lead to the avoidant attachment. And so that avoidant attachment in adulthood is characterized by difficulty in forming relationships and friendships, being nervous about getting close, and feeling a real apprehensiveness about being more intimate with a partner than you feel comfortable in being. And when I say intimate, I'm talking about close, like disclosing and sharing. And then if you grow up with that ambivalent or inconsistent, so the parent is inconsistent in their reactions, sometimes warm, sometimes not, wanting their way, and then sometimes responsive to the child's needs. This then results in an insecure infant caregiver bond, and then this can lead into adulthood with a similar type of pattern where the adult feels that they feel reluctant to get close. They worry that their partner doesn't really love them or won't stay with them. There's a real feeling of anxiety in the relationship. So the importance of secure attachment. We know that securely attached people have more committed, satisfying, interdependent, and well-adjusted relationships. So this really tells us about how important it is for parents early on in life to provide security, to provide responsiveness, to be consistent in their parenting and consistently positively responsive. And securely attached people seek and they provide support when they're under stress. We can go back and think about how important that is in our physical health. Securely attached people also have better mental health. So the longitudinal studies show moderate stability over the first 19 years of life and later in adulthood. But like I mentioned, these can be altered by life events, like those that are positive and that might be good events, something that helps you to overcome that insecure attachment, or negative events that might sabotage that secure attachment that you developed with your parent when you were, or parents when you were a child.
Let's take a moment to reflect. So researchers suggest that the passion in a love relationship tends to peak early in the relationship and then it gradually fades. So do you agree with this assessment? Is this consistent with your own experiences in love relationships? In other words, is passionate love a passing feeling? Well, it does turn out that for many people, this feeling of passion tends to fade after only a year or two, but it's often replaced by calmer, if not stronger, bonds of companionship. So, if this is your experience, I wonder, what do you think the reason for this would be? Or perhaps this isn't your experience. Why would this happen with others? I wonder, do you think that perhaps there's some biological or genetic explanation for this? Do you think that it's adaptive for us as humans to have a decline in passion? I mean, imagine this. Imagine if passion never declined. Would you be able to get much done in life? As you have children, for example, would you be able to take care of children as well if you have these all-consuming feelings of passion towards your partner? Would you get as much accomplished? So interesting things for us to think about. I think it's interesting to think about why this may happen, but it's also interesting to think about what the relevance of this knowledge is. So I wonder, do you think it's important that when people get into committed relationships, whether they marry or not, but let's say that they do marry, do you think it's important for people to know that it's very natural for passion to decline and that it stays down for quite a while? Actually, research suggests that it may stay down for about 15 years, at least go lower. Not that it disappears, but it tends to get lower. So what do you think the benefits of knowing this would be? Do you think people may view their relationship differently? Might they think that what they're experiencing is normal rather than perhaps thinking something's wrong because the passion isn't what it was at one point? So interesting for us to think about the application of some of this research.
So Sternberg's theory says that the strength of each of the three components of love tends to vary across time, and that passion peaks early in a relationship and then it decreases in intensity. Do you all think, I wonder what you think, do you think that sometimes people mistake a reduction in passion do they mistake it for a loss of love? So, when we think about relationships, sometimes we find that people will end relationships. You may have known people who've done this because they feel that they're no longer in love with the person. They may equate being in love with the passion. But what the research suggests, not only based on what Sternberg's theory suggests, but other research suggests that passion peaks early and then it decreases in intensity. You can also note here that both intimacy and commitment increase as time progresses. And here you can look, this is an image from your textbook, The Course of Love Over Time. And you see here that the three components typically progress differently over time. So this is important, I think, for people to know when they are in a committed relationship so that they don't become what we might call serial monogamous. That they don't, as soon as the passion has declined, they don't come to believe that they're no longer in love. And you can certainly increase the passion. But it's and there's so much benefit to staying in the relationship for the long term, not only for the couple, but if they have children, and it's a healthy relationship. It's so important for the children, whether it is regardless of the nature of the relationship. So why do relationships end? We're going to talk about this more in the next chapter, but sometimes it may be because of premature commitment. So someone gets committed to another person very early in the relationship. Perhaps it may even be a formal commitment is made, and this is before they've really been able to think about what they want in a relationship, and really before they've gotten to know that person. A big factor that affects relationships negatively is ineffective communication and conflict management skills. Many people have suggested that they've benefited from premarital counseling, and even if you're not getting married, and remember, we have to think about that concept again of heterosexism, that not all people in relationships have the opportunity to get married and it may, for various reasons, and it may be because of their family, the law, and wherever they live in the world. So, but when they're in whatever the nature of the relationship, how it's defined, whether it's legally defined or not, finding ways to improve communication skills can be very, very important. Also, sometimes people will become bored with the relationship, and so they might like that excitement in the beginning, and that's what was so interesting to them, and then it fades, and that's naturally going to happen with anything. We eventually habituate to it, and so that may cause the relationship to end. Perhaps there's an availability of a more attractive relationship, and then low levels of satisfaction. How love and marriage are seen is linked to a country's values and to their economic health. And you learned in an earlier chapter about individualism and collectivism, and many of you already knew about those concepts. So individualistic cultures, people in those cultures are more likely to marry for love, whereas in collectivistic cultures, people are more likely to have arranged marriages. Now, there are many cultures that are collectivistic and people marry for love. So I don't want you to come to the conclusion that if it's collectivistic, they're going to have an arranged marriage. It's just that the tendency is greater for that. And in individualistic cultures, you're not likely to see an arranged marriage. We'll be exploring marriage and arranged marriages more, and other styles of relationships. We'll be looking at that more in the next chapter. If you look at this chart in your textbook, I think this is a nice example for you to look at of the relationship between economy and individualism and collectivism, and whether or not someone indicated they would marry for love or not be willing to marry for love. So you can see here that the question that college students were asked in 10 different countries and in Hong Kong were, if a man or woman had all the other qualities you desired, would you marry this person if you were not in love with him or her? And you can see here variation, and the variation is associated with the levels of individualism. And when I say levels, we need to think of individualism and collectivism as being on a continuum, and so that it's not you either are one or the other. So you may be higher or lower as a country. And then also the country's economy as well plays an important role.
Let's take a moment for you to test yourself. So research suggests that men are more romantic than women, are less romantic than women, are just as romantic as women are, or do not acquire romantic feelings. If you selected are more romantic than women, you're right. Let's take a look at another question. Deshawn and Holly's romantic relationship contains a high level of commitment, but both passion and intimacy are lacking. Sternberg's triangular theory of love would consider their relationship as consummate love, companionate love, empty love, or fatuous love. If you selected empty love, you're right. Let's take a moment to just briefly review each of these. Consummate love is the complete form of love. It's representing the ideal relationship that many of us strive towards, but apparently, based upon some of the research, not a lot of people achieve. So, consummate love can be pretty hard to achieve, but consummate love, if you'll remember, is this type of love that is comprised of passion, intimacy, and commitment. So, all three are present. Companionate love is where a person or in a relationship, the passion has gone out of the relationship, but there's a deep affection and there's a commitment that remains. And this is generally a personal relation that you build with somebody that you share your life with, but that the person that, in your relationship, there's not sexual or physical desire. And then empty love, as you note here, is a type of love where that commitment remains, but intimacy and passion have died. And so in cultures where there's arranged marriages that are common, relationships often begin as empty love. But I do want to point out what you're going to learn in the next module is that these relationships can be very, very successful and lead to consummate love. And then we have what's called fatuous love. And fatuous love is that kind of whirlwind courtship and marriage where commitment is really motivated largely by passion without the stabilizing influence of intimacy. So make sure you review each of the different types of love that you learned about as you learned about Sternberg's triangular theory. And then think about what type of love you want to have. And then think about if you have had a relationship or you are in one, what type of love did you have? And think about other people that you know. What types of love do they have in their relationships? Let's look at another one. We know online dating is very popular, pretty common. And so what does the research have to say about it? So one reason that online relationships develop successfully is that de-individuation causes people to self-disclose less about themselves online. Is it that shared values are more important than face-to-face relationships? Is it that dating profile owners tend to be well practiced in self-presentation? Or is it that virtual romantic affairs are convenient and exciting for people? So which one do you think it is based on what you've learned? If you selected that shared values are more important than face-to-face relationships, that is correct. So I want to point out here that if we look at the third item, that dating profile owners tend to be well practiced in self-presentation, there may be some truth to that there are dating profile owners who are really good at self-presentation. But the question is, why do online relationships develop successfully? And so if you're not presenting your true self, that's not likely going to lead to relationship success. And just having a relationship because it's convenient is certainly not going to lead to success. And while excitement may be helpful initially, it's certainly not going to lead to longer term success. Here's another one. Which of the following possibilities is most likely to occur and demonstrates how heterosexism could affect the findings of research conducted on romantic love? Is it that heterosexists only conduct research that recognizes heterosexual couples and so stereotypes about other relationships persist? Is it that survey researchers sometimes forget to include a box for sexual orientation and this leads to incorrect conclusions? Is it that surveys from non-heterosexual participants are often collected but not reported in research articles? Or is it that researchers keep information confidential but participants are uncomfortable with research and don't participate? So while each of these could be a possibility, which of these are the most likely? And keep in mind, when you see phrases like only, like the first one, heterosexist only, that probably should be a red flag to you that this means that it is a very definitive statement. And there are very few instances in life where we can say that things will absolutely happen or absolutely will not happen. So I caution you when you see items like this to just take a second look, before you select that as the right answer. It doesn't mean that it's not, but just, second guess your thinking for a moment when you see statements like that you may be leaning towards. So if you selected surveys from non-heterosexual participants are often collected but not reported in research articles, you're correct. Be sure to take a look in your textbook at heterosexism and how much of what we know about relationships is based on heterosexual couples, and that there is a significant gap in the literature that in this area. So there's a lot of opportunity then for people who are interested in studying this to conduct studies that can be beneficial to our understanding of relationships outside of heterosexual relationships. So what have you learned about romantic love? Well, you've learned about some of the gender differences regarding love, and you've learned about some of the research findings on the experience of love in gay and straight couples. You also learned about Sternberg's triangular theory of love and the theory of adult attachment styles. This is one that I think about often. And you also learned about the course of romantic love over time, including what couples go through as they dissolve a relationship. And then finally, you learned about why relationships fail and what couples can do to help relationships last. What will you be learning about next? Well, in the next video, you're going to be learning about loneliness. You'll learn about loneliness and its prevalence, how early experiences and current social trends contribute to loneliness. You'll learn about how shyness and poor social skills and self-defeating attributions can contribute to loneliness. And then you'll also learn about some suggestions for conquering loneliness. As always, if you have any questions about what you're learning, please do not hesitate to reach out for me. I look forward to seeing each of you online.